What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today I'm going to talk about three different, I guess you would call them modes of play in Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop gaming in general, and my thoughts on each of them, the pros and cons, because I have run games in all three of these ways for prolonged periods of time, so I feel like I, have some qualification and insight to speak on them. So let's get into it. The three different modes of play that I am talking about would be Theater of the Mind, Battle Mats, and Maps. So, breaking those down for people that might be unfamiliar, Theater of the Mind is where you don't use any maps or minis. It's just a blank table with dice rolling across it, free as they may be, and you just describe everything narratively as the Dungeon Master, to where the players can visualize everything in the theater of the mind. So, this is how I run all of my actual play shows on the Eberron Renewed podcast, because we don't want to rely on maps and minis, just point and be like, I move there and stuff, because it's an auditory medium, so it's better if we describe things. But the pros to Theater of the Mind that I would say, the pros are it can be very evocative. If you do it for a while, when you first start out, it's going to feel a little clumsy, but once you've done it for a while, you can hit a point where you can describe things in a very visual way, to where it's easy for your players to visualize what's happening, what kind of monsters there are in the room, how they're moving, how they're attacking, things like that. And at the end of the day, in my opinion and my experience, your ability to describe something and evoke an image in the player's mind, as opposed to plopping a mini down on the table, which I'm pretty proud of this mini. Hide my face so you can see the mini. There we go. It's not the best mini painting job ever, but I'm pretty new at this hobby. And so, yeah, I'm happy with that young white dragon. But I could evoke the visual of a young white dragon that's going to look much more intimidating and impressive than this little guy. This little guy's kind of cute. So at the end of the day, once you've done it for a while, you can get much scarier and much more real feeling visuals than just plopping a mini down on the map. Additionally, Theater of the Mind gives you a lot of flexibility, because halfway through a fight, a player might ask you, hey, is this in the room? Is there a chandelier that I could cut the rope and have it drop down? And it being Theater of the Mind, you can just say, yes, there is. There has been this whole time, and nobody can say otherwise. Somebody might ask, why didn't you describe that? It's like, it wasn't important at the time. Now somebody wants to know about it. It's important. So it gives you that level of flexibility to be able to add things into a scene as it's progressing. Everything isn't set in stone on the table when you roll a map out, and it has everything on there. And additionally, when we talk about flexibility, also it gives you a bit of rules flexibility in terms of movement, distance, and things like that, the more tactical side of the game. If a player asks how far away is that creature from me, you can say 30 feet if you want them to be able to use all their movement to get to them, or you could say 40 feet if you want them to be able to get so close, but they can't quite get there. So you can kind of turn those dials to make the fight pace be what you want to be. Generally speaking, I take notes about the size of a room and things like that, so I have a more concrete reference behind the DM screen, but I do still have that power as the DM to tweak things a little bit in the moment. What are the cons when it comes to Theater of the Mind? So it can take a while to describe a room. When a group walks into the room initially, you can spend a fair amount of time saying there's a painting here and a desk here and yada, yada, yada. And it's a tricky thing, because if you don't make a habit of describing everything in the room, then when you do describe something being in the room, that is an instant flag for the players that thing is important, because the DM took the time to describe it. And so unless you're going to describe everything in every room all the time, you're going to have a bit of a tell for the players, unless you just don't mention those things. But then if they leave the room and you mention, yeah, the key was in the desk back in this room, it's like, you never described a desk. Well, you never asked about a desk. Well, yeah. So that is one big con, is the fact that you can have a bit of a tell in that when you describe things being in the room, generally speaking, that telegraphs that they have a level of import that a mundane version of it would not have. Additionally, describing where every enemy on the battlefield is at the start of a fight, where they're moving, keeping track of all that can be rather cumbersome. There is a reason why maps and minis gained so much favor and so many people use them, is because it makes it a lot easier to keep track of that stuff, and Theater of the Mind does suffer from that. Once again, I generally draw out a map behind the DM screen, and I'll have like my monsters marked and where the PCs are. And so I'll basically be doing maps and minis behind the screen so I can keep track of where everybody is on the battlefield, which at that point, why aren't you just doing it on the table for everyone to see? And so I get why you would still want to do Theater of the Mind, but that's something that I do. If you're running Theater of the Mind, I would recommend trying that out, of basically having your own version of maps and minis behind the screen that you can keep track of everything with. And the last con with Theater of the Mind is it can put a lot of pressure on the players to try and keep track of everything themselves. If they don't have that visual representation, then, you know, you might have a wizard or a sorcerer who wants to look up a spell between their turns so they don't waste everyone's time when it gets to their turn. But if you're doing Theater of the Mind, then there's this push for them to be paying attention when it's not their turn, so that when their turn comes around, they know the state of the battlefield. They know where everyone is, they know what everyone's done, and they can't just look at a map with minis on and go, okay, that's where everyone is, now I know what to do. So you kind of split focus, especially for your spellcasters, in that you're forcing them to pay attention all the time, or at least that's how it feels for them. But they could be spending that time preparing for their turn, which would cause combat to flow a lot smoother. So that is a give and take that you have, is you have people engaged the whole time because they feel like they need to be paying attention. But when their turn comes around, they won't be as prepared because they've been paying attention to what's going on the entire time. Battle mats is the second mode of play, and this is what I currently use for my home game. I have one of the big Chess X mega mats and some wet erase markers that I use, and I draw out rough outlines of the battlefields. And then I have monster minis like this guy here, and right now we just have little circles that are different colors on the battlefield for each player that they move around. We'll get the players' minis eventually, but we're working on it. It's our second session tonight, actually. So the pros when it comes to battle mats, they still offer you a good deal of flexibility. Granted, you are drawing the map down on a battle mat and providing that guidance, but the expectation is not that you're going to draw everything. But it takes less time to, you know, draw 3 paintings on the wall than to describe 3 paintings on the wall and draw a couple of desks here and there. You can just draw geometric shapes on the map and they don't have to be important. So that can be kind of a mask from the issue with Theater of the Mind of telegraphing, where it's really easy to, you know, just draw some geometrical shapes as the furniture or rubble or any other features of the room, and then call it good there. Additionally, with battle mats, you have a lot of freedom when it comes to the various battlefields that you are running in. You can make them any shape, any dimension, and especially if you invest in one of the bigger battle mats, you can have really big, sprawling, multi-moves to get across the whole map turns, and then the very next encounter, you can make it very small and a very intimate, closed, claustrophobic encounter. So that's why I really like battle mats, is they give you the flexibility, but you still have the concrete tactical nature of the tabletop game, where you can see where all the minis are. You can see everyone's location on the battlefield. And if somebody has gone up to go to the bathroom, grab any drink, something like that, and they come back, they can glance across the table, see where everyone's at, what they're doing, and not have to ask the person next to him, hey, what the heck happened? You might, like, if you see all of a sudden that there's a dragon on the battlefield while you were in the bathroom, you might go, hey, what? But other than that, you're going to cut down on player confusion a lot by having the battle mat with minis on it. And they don't even need to be one-to-one representational minis, just something like I have for my players, just something to mark, here is the spot on the battlefield that they currently reside at. Tonight, my players might be fighting some monodrones and tridrones and other ones. And I don't have those minis or those little pawns or anything. So I just have kobolds and goblins, and I'll say, hey, here's what the things look like. Here's something to represent where they're at on the map. And people can use their imagination and be fine with it. The downsides to battle mats, it can feel very pedestrian. I'm not an artist, So wet erase marker, just, drawing squiggled lines or straight lines and little shapes on there. It can feel kind of rudimentary, and it can be a little bit immersion breaking for some people potentially, which could be a downside. Also, a lot of times you're having to draw these on the fly. You're having to get up and like go around your players and reach over them and draw over their shoulder and things like that, which can be a little cumbersome. Typically speaking, when I run into an issue like that, I'll just call for a break. Like, hey, I need to draw this map. So everyone go to the bathroom, grab a drink, and come back and when I'm done. And the last big con that I'll get into, and it's not even one that's like a day-to-day con of using it at the table, but the battle mats, they can be quite expensive. They are an investment, especially if you get one of the bigger ones. And over time, or if you buy the wrong type of marker, or somebody on Amazon has listed their marker as one type and they're not, then you can potentially ruin a battle mat. Or over time, you'll eventually see the staining and stuff come up over time unless you take really good care of it, which can be frustrating because you spend a lot of money on this. For me, I bought this brand new battle mat, excited for my home game, did a test battle arena on it, drew some stuff, and then got some water, got paper towels, spritzed it all down, went to go wipe it, and nothing came off. And I had to order like the magic eraser, like cleaning sponge things, and spend about 20 minutes with the battle mat just deep cleaning it to get it back to a decent state. And then I threw those markers out and bought some actual wet erase markers from a reputable company instead of going with the cheap option on Amazon. So lessons learned. But that can be a pain point for a lot of people when it comes to these battle mats, is they may not last forever. You may need to replace it at one point, which is another investment, and they're not cheap. So it can become kind of a frustrating cycle. And especially if you're trying to draw a new map and you can see remnants of an old map that you drew on there, that can be rather frustrating. So that's the last big con for me with the battle mats, is longevity of them. And lastly, maps. So this is like S tier for a lot of people. Maps and minis, you go to like Staples and get them laminated, and like they're gigantic and they cover your whole table. So maps obviously are really great at giving a striking visual representation of a battlefield, whether you're using a physical map on the table or a projection or a television screen. Whatever mode of map that you're utilizing, it can be very visually striking, especially some of the new like animated maps that they're coming out with for digital displays. Really cool. Another big pro with the maps is the fact that they're a visual shorthand. You don't have to describe everything in the room. Everything is there. And if you communicate to your players like, hey, if you can see it on the map, it's in the room, then they don't have to ask you about it. They're like, yeah, I'm going to grab that torch off the wall. I'm going to like throw that painting at the zombie, whatever. Because if it's on the map, it's in the room. Or, you can like hand wave some stuff and be like, hey, by the way, these crypts here aren't actually here. That's just a raised dais with nothing on it. And, your players can erase that from their mind and continue on the encounter with everything else that's on the map. Additionally, the maps and minis combo can be very immersive. Like if you're looking at this like very well done map of a ancient crypt and you have actual minis of zombies and a lich and all that stuff, you can get really caught up in it. I have played a lot of sessions with like the perfect map and the perfect set of minis, and they've been some great sessions to run and play in and be engaged in, and it's so much fun. But let's get into the cons of maps. And there are quite a few cons in my opinion. It's time consuming. You can spend a lot of time looking for the map that's just right, because as a DM, if I'm using a map, I want to be able to give that kind of carte blanche. If you can see it on the map, it's there. You can interact with this world. So it can take a while for me to find a map that I am happy with. And I know there's like really good software out there to make your own maps, but that's also equally time consuming. So that can be a frustrating point. Also, you lack a lot of flexibility. Once again, if halfway through the combat encounter, you want to say that there's a door that swings open that you hadn't described before, it's a lot harder to get that buy-in, because you've told them if it's on the map, it's there. Well, now there's something that's here that's not on the map, which is not what was the agreed upon social contract, for lack of a better way to put it, for this encounter. Additionally, you create a lot more cognitive dissonance if you you utilize minis that aren't the right minis for the monsters, but you're doing a map that's the right map for the right space. Like if it's that ancient crypt, but you don't have enough zombie minis, so you throw out a couple goblin minis and say, yeah, these are zombies too. And that can just, once again, be a little bit immersion breaking. And I would say more so than if you were just using a battle map, because you get that suspension of disbelief when you have the battle map of like, okay, I'm already having to engage my imagination. So extending that further isn't as big a deal as when you're using correct map, correct minis, and then all of a sudden you have to extend your imagination that you weren't having to utilize as much to these additional minis or the PC minis or whatever. And lastly, a big con with maps is it can be expensive. Whether you are doing a digital option but wanting to pay somebody that creates maps, whether it's via Patreon or a bespoke store or commissioning them, maps aren't free, despite what Google image searches would have you believe. So being able to get those maps from artists and paying them for their work, paying them for their labor, it can add up over time, especially if you're wanting to run 2-3 combat encounters per session or per adventure, and you want a unique map for each of those. Secondly, the reusability option is greatly lessened. My battle mat I can use for every combat encounter because I'm just drawing on it. Whereas if I'm getting specific maps for specific encounters that I visualize in my head, then if I reuse that, it's either they are returning to a location they've been at before, or I'm having to, make some concessions, tweak some things, stuff like that. And my more keen-eyed players might be like, we've been here before, haven't we? And then if you're doing physical table play, printing out these maps, getting them laminated if that's something you want to do. All of that stuff also adds up, especially if you want multiple maps. So while the maps can be very visually striking and very fun, the cost can add up very quickly, and they remove a lot of flexibility that you would have normally with either Theater of the Mind or Battle Mats. Some of you may notice that there are 2 modes of play that I did not discuss in this video, and that is virtual tabletops, like specifically things like Tailspire, or Harpy is still very maps and minis. Roll20 is maps and minis largely. So something like Tailspire that's a 3D environment is not something that I've engaged with a whole lot. I've done it as a player a little bit, and I've never run it as a DM. And then additionally, actual terrain, the 3D pieces that you can get for your table and actually build out a dungeon and do various elevations and things like that. The reason I didn't get into those is because I don't have enough experience to give thorough pros and cons from an actual lived experience standpoint. I have run games in 3 modes of play: Theater of the Mind, Battle Mats, and Maps. So that's what I wanted to cover in this video. Let me know what you thought down below. We are once again on the road to 10K subscribers, so be sure to subscribe. And when we hit 10K, I'm going to buy one of you something nice, a book of your choosing, a book, not a bundle, off the Dungeon Masters Guild or the D&D Beyond website. So be sure to subscribe below. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.